All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar that is titled Open Education and Microcredentials, Getting a Seat at the Table, which is hosted by the Open Education Association. My name is Aisha Abdullah. I am an open education project manager for Spark, and I'm also a member of the Open Education Association Steering Committee. I am based in Maryland, and if you're familiar with the area, I am in like Montgomery County, close to DC. So, for a little bit of background before we get started, which I know you're all here to learn more about microcredentials and the intersection with open education, but I want to share a little bit about the Open Education Association, which launched late last year. So, it is a national membership organization for people working to transform education through open resources and practices. We have been focused on laying the groundwork for a coordinated and sustainable future for open education by building infrastructure, relationships, resources, and programming that strengthen collaboration and expand access to knowledge for all. At this time, we are focused on the United States as well as higher education, and it is an individual membership organization. However, there are a lot of different pathways to be involved, whether you are a member or not, including the Open Education Conference, which is an international conference, is virtual this year, and registration is open for that. There's a wonderful list of resources that the association provides, such as a list of all the open education webinars and conferences. And then we also encourage you to visit our website to access all of our upcoming events, published community resources, and learn more about how to become a member. So that is obviously a very quick overview of the association, but if you're interested in learning more about what we do, the benefits of becoming a member and all of that, we actually have an information session tomorrow where that will be a dedicated time to learn more about the association, walk through, what membership looks like and what non-membership pathways you can be involved in all of that. So I will be there. So if you want to spend a half an hour with me tomorrow, feel free to join and I will share the links of everything that I just mentioned. So, to go into the bulk and heart of this webinar, so before I pass it over to our presenter, just want to share that this webinar is about 90 minutes long. The first 30 minutes will be a presentation, and then the next 30 minutes, we will be joined by a few amazing panelists. We strongly encourage you to be vocal in the chat and share your experiences, as well as any questions, which we will have time for at the end. So the first 60 minutes of this presentation and panel is recorded, but the last half hour is informal discussion where attendees can feel free to speak comfortably. We're going to turn the recording off and you will be able to unmute if you want to and talk with the panelists and presenter, as well as share any thoughts, questions, experiences in the chat. And we will post the recording shortly after this webinar. If you registered for this, you will receive it through email, but it will also be posted on our website. So with that, I am going to pass it over to our presenter, Lisa, to introduce herself and get this webinar on the road.
Well, good morning from Prescott, Arizona, and good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. I'm so happy to be here with you, and it was great seeing where you all are from. I see that there's a lot of people online from West Virginia, and I admire the work that you're doing in this micro-credential space, and so really excited to have an opportunity to share some of what I've learned and what our team has learned. But please know that I am learning so much from you all as I attend different events and meet with people from West Virginia. So thanks for your leadership in this area. Really excited to talk to you a little bit about where open education and micro-credentials can meet. My background is that I have been in higher ed for over 32 years. I just retired last October, and I am spending my time working in the area of micro-credentials, learner and employment records, talent marketplaces, and looking for opportunities where open education can be used as a tool in this work. I'd like to share just a couple of statistics with you that really get us thinking about our future. We've seen rapid change of so many aspects of the world in the last couple of years. And we're seeing that and anticipating that 39% of job skills will change by 2030. That's a huge amount of job skills to change as we look as higher educators at preparing the future's workforce. top that off with now 52% of job postings no longer specify any educational requirement. I just want to let that sit with you for a minute. The work that we do in higher ed is preparing students for jobs, for work, for life, giving them life skills, giving them work skills, giving them knowledge. And to think that about half of job postings no longer specifying an educational requirement, what does that mean for higher education? We've seen so many articles, and we know that there is value in higher education. This is why we've done this work and continue. But as we look at this, we really need to think in higher ed as to how we're preparing our students and how we can ensure that they have the skills necessary to excel in life. Also, 70% of employers are using skills-based hiring. In the past, when I started working in the early 90s, it was what did you study? Where did you go to school? What was your major? And do you have any experience from internships or cooperative education? Or how have other jobs that you've had prepared you for that job? Now we're looking at skills-based hiring. What skills are new employees or prospective employees coming into the workforce with? And as we look at that, how do you document that? And how do we ensure that our students have the skills to make them successful? So, what we're going to talk about in this brief half hour is a little bit about open education, but we're talking to the Open Ed Association, so I know that there's not a need to go too deep into this. But we are going to talk about micro-credentials. I'm going to share some frameworks. We're going to talk about the importance of workforce partnerships, and then we're going to have a panel with some really fabulous people who come from a statewide workforce development office, from industry, and from higher ed to have a conversation about where open education and micro-credentials could intersect. And then, as Aisha mentioned, we'll have that opportunity for Q&A. So just to make sure we're all on the same page here, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation has a definition that is so widely used in the open education community. And they define OER as teaching, learning, and research materials that either reside in the public domain or they've been released under an intellectual property license or an open license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. Um, I'm sure that most of us are very well and familiar with this definition. But also, what's really important about open education are the 5 R's. And I see the 5 R's as really the values of open education. And, David Wiley put this together so long ago. We started out with the 4 R's and then we got another R. And this really lays the foundation for open education. And they really revolve, it's reuse, being able to reuse materials, being able to revise materials, being able to remix them, putting them together, retaining those, being able to continue to use them, not renting them for a semester, and being able to redistribute those original and or altered versions of the content. And so these 5 R's are going to be important to our conversation just a little bit later as we really talk about how open education can be leveraged in this new world of micro-credentials. So, want to make sure we all know what micro-credentials are because for some of you, this might be very new and it's a little confusing. So, hang in there with me. I'm going to go through some definitions and then I'm going to show it to you in action what this really is. So, the first are LERs, Learning and Employment Records. And an LER is a digital record and it documents a person's skills, credentials, and experiences from education, work, and other learning. And so we're combining all of these things into what we're calling a digital record of an LER. And these LERs can contain skills and competencies. And we can think about this as what skills and competencies have more formally been awarded like or verified, but also informally in open recognition, like that people can attest that they have these skills or competencies. It also can include records of credentials, degrees, and employment history, have it all together where that can be verifiable. Now, this can really change a lot of aspects of how we do like learning, education, and how employers can do hiring when all of this information is in a digital record that's verifiable. So that's what an LER is. So that's the first step. The second definition that we're going to talk about are microcredentials. And a microcredential, and this is a definition, these definitions are from the Arizona Learning Mobility Collaborative, a collaborative of the 13 public universities and community colleges in Arizona that are moving towards this work. And so they've defined a microcredential that it validates, verifies, and attests to achievement or mastery of one or more specific skills, competencies, or a defined area of knowledge. They often require evidence to demonstrate competence. And so when those are a lot of big words, but basically it's us looking at what skills a student or learner have demonstrated mastery of at a specific proficiency level. So I can take a course and I can pass a course perhaps without learning or mastering a specific competency in the course. I could get an 80% probably and not learn a critical aspect of that course. It would be very unfortunate, but it could happen. But when we look at micro-credentials, we're looking at attesting that the student mastered a specific skill a specific way at a specific proficiency level. And often that's much higher than simply passing a course. That level might be 85 or 90% of attesting that the student mastered the skill, not the entire course. So I hope you're with me. I'm going to pause for just a second to see if anybody has like a big question or if that doesn't make sense in the chat, because I want to make sure we're all on the same length, on the same wavelength there on that. Okay, I don't see any ellipses moving or anything, so I think we're good. So now I have another definition for you, and this is also from the Arizona Learning Mobility Collaborative, and it's a micro-credential pathway. And basically, these are two or more micro-credentials that are stacked and are employer validated. And so this employer validation is really important because it allows a higher education institution, a learner, and an employer to know that these skills that students are mastering are the skills that they need. And these micro-credential pathways that are two or more micro-credentials that have stacked together can provide an immediate off-ramp to a livable wage as for an in-demand job, but also can serve as an on-ramp to stackable credentials towards a certificate of completion, a degree in higher education. And so we're looking at, hey, how can we get a student in 1 year or less into the workforce, making a livable wage, but then provide them with the scaffolding and a pathway to continue their education for increased mobility in their career. So this is a diagram from the Education Design Lab that kind of lays out what a micro-credential pathway looks like. And so there are some areas of it. They need to be stackable, those stackable credentials. They need to be transparent. They need to be portable. We need to be able to have the students take these micro-credentials with them. They need that verification is critically important with a micro-credential. And they need to be connected to learner agency. And so what you see here in this diagram here on the left is there's the micro-credential skills badges, and then they build to a larger micro-credential pathway. They're validated by employers, and they have that off-ramp to a career with different steps as they earn additional stackable credentials. So that's kind of a little bit of a background on these micro-credentials. So I'd like to ask you for a moment, Have you earned a microcredential? If you have, tell us about it in the chat. Just about a year ago, I earned a series of microcredentials that made a microcredential pathway. It was through an organization called One Ed Tech, and it was the Trusted Apps Certified Leader. And I went through five different modules in a number of areas, including data privacy and accessibility, designing a digital learning ecosystem, curriculum innovation and strategies, data insights for learner success, and learner achievement and opportunities. And I earned five micro-credentials that combined made the micro-credential pathway, and I earned an open digital badge in the Trusted App Certified Leader. And I see Devin posted in the chat that they earned one from UPSIA on U2B Business Development, and you just finished the course series. Congratulations. I see that Ronica, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, learned one from Brisk for teaching. So congratulations. I would love to know like how it made you feel to have earned a micro-credential. And Roberta earned an SAS micro-credential. That's fantastic. I know that when I earned my micro-credential, I felt pride, I felt achievement, I worked hard for it, and I loved getting validated like incrementally that I was learning and I was achieving. And I had some really tough assessments to be able to show that I mastered those micro-credentials. So thank you so much to those of you who have earned micro-credentials for sharing that with us. Something that you might not know is that 51% of higher education institutions already are offering micro-credentials. So if you don't know if your institution is offering micro-credentials, you might be. And so definitely something for you to look into at your institution. So this is a big slide full of a lot of information, and this shows the LER ecosystem. So remember I talked about LERs. We've talked about LERs, we've talked about microcredentials, we've talked about microcredential pathways. And so this ecosystem report, which was created by Smart Resume and is their 2026 report, shows who are issuing microcredentials. And so we have post-secondary education, we have youth and secondary education, we have MOOC and learning experience platforms, skills assessments, licensing and professional associations, government, workforce and skills development, and employers are all issuing microcredentials. There's different technology that make up this ecosystem. So these micro-credentials can be issued and they can have the open digital badge behind it that has that verifiability. There are resume builders, credential management, and exchange networks that allow these to be curated and for them to be transferable and portable. And then there's areas that allow for consumption and use of the LERs like job boards, talent marketplaces, things like background screening, pathway and career planning, HR information systems. But what's missing in this LER ecosystem, and the whole reason we're talking today, and what I think should be on the right here before organizational issuers, is authoring the content. Where does the content for the micro-credentials lie in this LER ecosystem? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about. So why micro-credentials now? I've shared a lot of different statistics with you. Employers are shifting from those degree first signals to skills first evidence. They want to see this. They're doing skills-based hiring. The job roles are changing faster than traditional programs can adapt. Learners want shorter, more flexible pathways that fit into their lives. We also have experiential learning, and how do we make sense of experiential learning with prior learning assessment? Lifelong learning is no longer optional. We saw how much jobs are going to be changing. Learners need ways to make what they've learned more visible, portable, and trusted. And there's this whole language of skills that really needs to infiltrate so that we can really work in this arena. 82% of higher education leaders say their institutions plan to implement or expand micro-credentials within the next 5 years. So what we're going to talk about in the next 10 minutes is critical in regard to what's happening on your campuses. So I'm going to shift gears here and talk a little bit about the microcredential value framework. Now, I shared with you what I consider the 5 R's being the open education values framework. So now we're going to look at what I have pulled together as a microcredential value framework. And when we look at this, I want the first thing that you see, I hope, is that it's learner centered. Everything has to revolve around our learners. This is why we do our work. And this is how we ensure that industry gets successful, well prepared employees. And in this framework, I have identified like that these micro credentials need to be accessible. They need to have entry points that are flexible. They need to be able to allow students that access so that they can be earning and learning at the same time. Assessment is a critical aspect of this because when we are issuing a micro credential, we are saying that a student has mastered a skill at a specific proficiency level. We talked about it being a year or less for a micro-credential pathway. That employer and industry engagement is critical. We talked very briefly about skills validation, but it's a critical aspect of ensuring that as higher education, we are ensuring that what we're providing to our students will meet the needs of employers and industries. Of course, they have to be high quality. They need to be skills based. Collaboration, coordination between faculty, between administration, between employers, between our workforce development offices at the state level or community level, all critical. They need to be relevant so they're useful in the workplace. That stackability that we've talked about. We need to ensure that these materials are clear, that they're transparent, that the skills that the students are learning are also transparent, and they need to be shareable, both content from an open education standpoint and also that portability, as I briefly touched on when I was talking about that LER ecosystem and the definitions. So they're short learning experience, they're intentional, they're values-based pathways that make learning visible, verified, and valued. So what I've done is I've taken the 5 R's and I overlaid that on the micro-credential value framework and created an open micro-credential framework and really looked at where reuse happens, where revision happens, where remixing can happen, where retainment can happen, and where redistribution can happen. And so when we look at reuse, we're looking at that access piece. That is a pivotal value of the work that we do in open education. At times, the assessment can be reused. And then also being able to change the duration of content, which is something we do all the time in the open education world, is an opportunity for reuse. As we look at revision, we're also seeing that duration is a critical aspect of that, as is ensuring that things are relevant and meeting the needs of employers, and so that employer and industry engagement and making changes, that quality improvement is critical, and then ensuring that they're skills based. As skills change, we saw how much we're going to see change in just the next few years. We need to make sure that that revision can happen in our micro credentials. As we move into remixing, again, the skills, being able to remix skills so that we're meeting the needs of for a specific employer or industry or community, having that collaboration coordination, and ensuring relevance. What's relevant in one region of the United States in regard to some of the content may not be relevant in another. So being able to remix and also revise is critical. Retaining that stackability is going to be really important. And then when we redistribute, that allows for clarity and transparency. It also allows us to shift our thinking a little bit. When we look at a micro-credential, if we provide too many micro-credentials into the workforce that are all different, they will dilute the value of the microcredentials. And so being able to have that transparency, being able to share and redistribute them, providing access to those materials can be a game changer in leveraging open education for this microcredential work so that we ensure that we're meeting industry needs as opposed to immediate community needs. And so just wanted to share that with you there. As we continue, I just want to mention a little bit about open badges. So there's a difference between a microcredential and a badge. A microcredential is the content, the assessment, it's the very, you're earning the microcredential. Just like, and then the badge is the representation of the microcredential. Just like a transcript is a representation of the courses and degrees you've earned and courses you've completed and degrees you've earned. And so, but with an open badge and with a micro-credential, there's a whole bunch of information inside. It's a metadata. And that's what makes this very valuable because it talks about the alignment, what criteria was used for the student to earn complete the micro-credential and earn the badge, a description, a badge name, a digital signature, that evidence that I mentioned earlier. Often expiration dates, the issuing dates, who issued it, the recipient, and the verification. And that metadata behind the open digital badge that the student gets is what really makes this transferable, what allows an employer or another educational institution to be able to trust that that micro-credential has been earned. 75% of our higher education leaders report that students are more likely to enroll in programs that offer micro-credentials for academic credit. And so what I'm talking a little bit about today is how we can leverage open education for micro-credential work, but we can leverage open education and micro-credential work together to look at how we can increase enrollment in higher ed and all of these other initiatives. So start thinking kind of out of the box as to how we can solve some of these challenges with some of these data and how we can leverage open education in those areas. Partnering with workforce is really important, and so I am going to make this my last slide of the 30 minutes. But I want to show you what this looks like in action. And so this is an example from the Maricopa Community Colleges who have partnered with Bank of America and Dixie, and we're going to be able to talk about this a little bit more in the panel and the Q&A. But this is an example of a micro-credential pathway, and it prepares students to be a financial services sales agent. There is, and Dixie, feel free to interrupt me if I say anything incorrectly here in terms of the subject matter. But there is, in order to do financial services sales, there is a national compliance call need out of FINRA called the SIE, the Securities Investments and Exchanges. Oh, Dixie, help me. Did I get it?
Securities Industries Essentials.
Thank you. Um, that is critical and required for anyone to work in this area. It is a third-party micro-credential that is issued by FINRA, but there is training that needs to happen in order for students to be prepared to learn what they need to, that content, to be successful in this area. And so an example at Scottsdale Community College is that students take a course called SIE, Securities Industry Essentials, and then they take a learning lab that prepares them to sit for the SIE certification exam. Now, what really, what we've heard what the Maricopa Community Colleges heard was that while students could successfully complete the exam, when they got into the workforce, they needed some additional skills. And so some of those skills were soft skills or durable skills. And things like communication, empathy, professionalism, collaboration, critical thinking, self-directed learning, a lot of these skills that you're seeing here, they learned this in the course, but they needed to learn these. And so we created a micro-credential that includes these skills, but specifically aligned to the finance industry, with the idea that it could be all put together as a micro-credential pathway, and that it could be leveraged not only for the Maricopa community colleges, but also for other community college systems in the nation that are preparing students for this work. And not only could this new micro-credential be leveraged for this, but it could also be included in finance classes and other areas. And so it has been validated by Bank of America and a number of other financial industry partners, and they went through a full skills validation. And this particular micro-credential pathway has an off-ramp to a number of different careers. You can see their wages. And so the initial career is a securities, commodities, and financial services sales agent. And students can then complete additional coursework and credentials at the Maricopa Community College that then allows them to become a client-facing associate. And then they can earn their associate in applied science in banking and finance to become a paraplanner. And then they can earn their Bachelor of Business Administration and continue those stackable credentials. And so this is what a micro-credential pathway can look like that has been developed hand in hand with industry. Is this piece here is going to be openly licensed and available to everyone who wants it on Pressbooks, and be able to be leveraged in other curriculum, as well as for those institutions that are specifically looking at the SIE. And so wanted to share that with you. We will have this coming out in the fall, which we're really excited about. But also one other piece that's critically important is not only did we have the finance industry involved in our skills validation and this work, but we also have been meeting regularly with the State Office of Economic Opportunity to ensure that our work aligns with them as well. So with that, I'm going to jump through a couple of slides real quickly here. I wanted to share that 96% of employers say microcredentials strengthen a candidate's application. And with that, I am going to introduce our panel. And what I will do is I have some questions for each of them specifically. So I'm going to ask them to just introduce themselves as they answer the question, if that's okay with the team. So our first question is for Dixie. Dixie, from your work across industry, how are employers thinking about micro-credentials right now? And from where you sit, why does it matter that those credentials are built openly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dixie McMahon. As Lisa said, I am part of Bank of America, specifically sitting on the workforce development team. Here at Bank of America, our workforce development efforts not only work to build pathways for great careers here at the bank, we also commit to helping economic mobility by fostering a skills-first approach to hiring across all industries with all employers. And it's just a great talent pool that we like to take advantage of and advocate and really demonstrate to our partner and colleagues across other employers and clients to do the same. Microcredentials plays an important part of the skills-first movement. And what we're seeing here at the bank, as well as with the other employer partners that are sitting at the skills-first hiring table, is that skills-first hiring and microcredentials supporting that really helps with the data-driven approach that's proven to help really allow us to tap into this talent pool. So really expanding and broadening our talent pool. It's also improving the quality of hires. When you see a microcredential on an application, a lot of employers feel that is a strong signal that this individual has obtained and or mastered the skills that make them more job ready. They know what to expect. So it's not necessarily just the technical skills, to Lisa's point, it could be infused with durable and soft skills that are critical to most jobs, such as communications, etc. And the better the hiring, the less in turnover and attrition. And that gets to an employer's bottom line. So really, microcredentials, I'd say, based on our experience for those established, industry recognized microcredentials, we are increasingly becoming more curious and accepting of the emerging microcredentials for the reasons I just stated. The signal of job-ready skills, the reduction in hiring risk, the decrease in training costs, and the really attractive component to microcredentials is that employers have a voice in the content, and you can help build that together with educators. So you have familiarity, you have trust that is aligned to the demand that you as an employer have. And but I'd say, that was a caveat. To Lisa's point, the world of microcredentials is growing incredibly fast. There's a sheer number of microcredentials available out there, and the rapid pace of change, I think, to help support employers to continue to grow an adoption of using microcredentials in their skills-based hiring is, I think, to me, the secret ingredient is building these microcredential pathways on an open platform. Open credentials, to me, has that benefit to really foster that trust, that familiarity and trust, because at its core, it's providing a consistent, standardized set of content that can be leveraged across the board by many users. That consistency, that standardization is also really especially important to employers that hire across geographies. Here at Bank of America, we hire across the United States and globally. But to know that you can tap into a set of content that is going to be consistent no matter the geography has benefit. So the second benefit to the open concept is its modularity, in meaning that at the core, yes, open credentials can be that consistent, standardized content. But then an employer can then take that foundation and layer upon it any of the proprietary or unique to that employer training that's required. In being able to do that, you're saving the employer time and money. Very important for us employers. So that would be another, I'd say, call out to how the open credential world can really help microcredentials, and just how much we here at Bank of America have appreciated partnering with Lisa and the Maricopa system in the current microcredential expansion we're building to just make it even better. And, not only us that they've engaged, they've pulled in other educators, other providers, nonprofit partners, employers across geographies. And that really, we have a philosophy at the bank about we're better when we're connected, and collaboration yields a better output. And I definitely see that in the way this open credential for microcredentialing is being done. So I appreciate the time today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Dixie. And I think you really brought home like that, how important it is that as we look at nationwide and global industry, like that, being able to have consistency across geographies is really important, and definitely something that open education can assist with. So thank you for sharing that. Our next question is for Katie. Katie, federal programs like Workforce Pell are shaping how microcredentials develop nationally. What problems are those programs designed to solve, and how are they supporting industries?
Thanks, Lisa. Katie Bellows, Workforce Sector Strategies Administrator at the Office of Economic Opportunity. States are really right now looking at some key definitions, portability, stackability, and all of the intrinsic elements in a strong micropathway design are now becoming part and parcel for approved policy at a state level in order for all of the programs that are potentially eligible as Title IV and accredited provider offerings to be included in the state's Workforce Pell Program list. The opportunity on the table right now is really for each state to really think more cohesively about ways that sector strategies and workforce policy in general can align to the in-demand sectors that critical shortages in terms of talent or skill areas have been identified. In Arizona, we're excited to both update our in-demand occupation list to make sure that we are waiting for both in-demand, high skill, and high wage occupations effectively. But the stackability and portability definitions are really important building blocks that will help to really identify what credentials of value look like at a state level and create stronger networks from industry and employers helping to co-design and deliver the training programs and interventions that make the strongest impact for where we want to be able to see future workers and their skills aligned to what employers are calling for. So those problems in terms of what our definitions and core sets look like are really right now on the table for cohesive design elements, strong state leadership, and a future state where micropathways are part and parcel of how we are designing workforce strategy and helping to activate the highest number of potential learners that are routing through those micropathways, really leaning heavily on the definition of stackability for what comes next after that entry point into the field.
Thank you, Katie. I'm curious about how you're seeing nationwide, how some of the states are reacting and some of the initiatives that are happening, and how you think that for those in the audience who are wondering if they're one of those 51% of institutions that are in this work, or that are wondering like how does this trickle, like this, there's things happening at the federal government, there's things happening at the state government, and how is this trickling down to their institutions so that they can have a better understanding of that?
In terms of how institutions can work with their workforce council or their state workforce board effectively, I think it's really finding those elements that could be collaboratively solved for and developed on those problem statements. OEO hosts a microelectronics automated industrial technology network across 6 of the 10 community colleges in Arizona called Ready Tech Go. So that really lends itself to stronger employer and industry engagement and the regional customization of where there may be small variants in terms of the cohesive and shared curriculum. So if it's an 80-20 model, how are we making accommodations for regional demand? And then how do we effectively route awareness for that network and the course offerings and the micro pathways, not only through career services and advising at the institutions, but also through our local area workforce board, our one-stops, and ways that we can identify braided funding for individuals who can benefit not only from workforce Pell and micro pathways, but potentially also from WIOA as a funding source.
Thank you so much, Katie. And so, for many of us, like in the audience, we might not realize that there are things happening at the state level that impact how we develop, what programs we develop, how we develop them, and move them forward. And so, kind of understanding that there's national definitions happening, there's state definitions, policies. In like West Virginia legislation that's happening, that are kind of moving some of this work, and then having an understanding as to that while you may not know about this, as that this is happening at your institution. There are opportunities for you to potentially get involved and leverage open education for this work. And so thank you, Katie, so much for that information, which kind of just goes right into Andrew. Um, what's driving this micro-credential growth at the community college level right now? What has it taken to actually build programs that work for your students and your region of New England? Bristol Community College operates in a region where skills-based hiring is central. What's that meant practically for how you design and position your programs? And how does open education help that? Lots of questions for you, Andrew. And who are you?
Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. Great questions, and there's a lot of relevant information. And yes, it is highly can be highly complex building micro credentials because it is fairly straightforward just to build academic programs, and without institutional guardrails, that can be done by faculty members, by administrators pretty easily and readily. But the impact isn't going to be as significant. So I think when it comes to building micro credentials, it's important that we start with the why, if you will, and that why has to come from our employers. Simply providing educational opportunities for the sake of educational opportunities is great and is fine, but it's not primary and century to the role and mission of a community college or to a college that is trying to train and provide education for employment, right? Everything we do really needs to drive our graduates further and deeper into the employment space. And so we really took that approach and we thought pretty deeply about how to build micro credentials, not just taking our standard degrees and cutting them in half to make certificates and then cutting them in half again to make smaller certificates and then cutting them in half again to make micro credentials. Ergo, they're stackable. Put them together and you put 14 of these pieces together and then you have a degree. That may functionally make sense, but doesn't meet the purpose and function of what a microcredential can bring to a graduate. ACNU recently had a publication where they cited that employers are looking increasingly for folks with not only just degrees and certifications, but also additional micro credentials or certifications on top of just the degrees that they have. So the first question, what is driving micro-credential growth? The biggest driver of micro-credential growth really is coming from the students and from employers. Employers are looking for, we've heard calls for soft skills, for durable skills, whatever you may call them. And so institutions are working pretty hard to make sure that our graduates have not only those experiences, but also demonstrated skills within those particular areas of expertise or those domains so that employers can more readily rely upon the degrees and credentials that the graduates have when they step into the workplace. Building the programs, I would highly encourage institutions of higher education or employers who want to build their own micro credentials to spend a lot of time thinking about the governance of how to build those micro credentials as well as how they function. For instance, you provided a statistic. There's a vast number of colleges are pursuing or considering pursuing additional micro credentials. But I would ask, how many of them have integrated them either into their existing transcripts or into an LER? And if they aren't running through the registrar's office and the educational experiences are not being certified by education professionals and documented in a way that is meaningful, then individuals like Dixie with Bank of America are going to have a real hard time onboarding based on those credentials because they rely on what is the metadata, what is the information inside of this credential, this transparency within the credential. And I think that's where open education can step in and can provide some of the standardization and also provide some of the driving force around building some of these micro credentials. There's a comment in here about Bristol, just to speak pretty quickly. In Massachusetts, our governor mandated that state agencies move away from education-based hiring and move towards skill-based hiring. So as colleges, we've been grappling with how do you do that? And then how can we prepare our students who are graduates to go into an ecosystem or an economy where the credential or the education level may still be important, but where we need to make sure that we're manifesting those skills. And micro-credentials have really been instrumental in helping us to bridge that gap. Hope that provides some perspective, but I do believe that micro-credentials are an important part of liberating the information that's hidden within a transcript. Just because somebody receives a C in a class, that doesn't tell an employer or the student very much about their experiences. For instance, if this is college algebra and they get a C, does that mean they understand 100% of the material at a 70% level or 70% of the material at 100% level? That matters to employers who are looking for comprehensive educational experiences and also skill documentation. So I think that's a little bit of an insight into what's driving the work that's happening at community colleges and four-year institutions. We're trying really hard to respond to a community-based call for more transparency and more granularity, and also more function within the credentials that are being offered by institutions.
Andrew, that's fantastic information, and I know that you and I have talked a little bit about what the skills-based hiring has happened, what's been going on at Bristol Community College, and that's like a whole nother webinar. But I would love to hear a little bit about well, where do you think how open education can really fit in this work as well?
Okay, so as I say this, I know that recognize that there will be some who really consider OE and OER as textbook synonymous, and some who see it as vastly different. I'm not stepping into that foray, but one of the advantages of textbook and textbook publishers was that somewhere along the lines, they helped institutions of higher institutions standardize what is being taught within classes. Academic freedom abounds, absolutely. But largely, if somebody's teaching out of the same college algebra textbook across the nation, the students are getting the same basic material. And that's driven by the publisher because that's the resource that the instructors and the students have ready access to. It's the framework around which the instruction can happen. I think open education and micro-credentials can serve a similar type of purpose, right? If as we build the micro-credentials and we put them in credential registries, similar to Credential Engine or some kind of a transparency framework, so we know what's in them, other institutions can pick up the OE micro-credential and deploy it at their institution. And slowly over time, we'll see more standardization of what is happening inside these educational experiences and these micro credentials. And that will vastly help employers like Dixie, like many other employers that are out there. If everybody is just building every institution or every company is building micro credentials and just putting them on the shelf for individual need or for customized training, that's great and that's wonderful, but it hasn't solved the very complex HR function that most of our institutions or that most companies are struggling with when it comes to skill-based hiring, which is I got a name, but I don't know what's inside this thing. And if we can provide more transparency of what's inside this thing, then it's going to provide more fidelity, but also more function for the student who has the credential.
Absolutely. And Dixie, I saw your head nodding. Did you want to add anything to that? I saw you fully engaged with what Andrew was sharing there.
No, just want to emphasize, I really think it's partly about helping employers navigate and have that visibility and understanding of what they're reading, what's on the paper, how, and so no, just to echo the importance of not only making sure it's industry aligned, but making sure it's industry understood, that they do understand what they're reading and make sense for them. I think that's critical.
Thank you. Yeah, I often refer to it as learner-centered, but employer and industry-driven. That's really how our micro-credentials should work. Um, So I have a question for all of you, and I'm going to throw it to Katie first in case she has anything to add to this, because she has to leave at 11, in just 4 minutes. So, but the question is for open education practitioners in the audience who want to get into these conversations on their campuses. Where is the most realistic entry point? And Katie, from a state level, this might not have like a really clear idea, but I wanted to throw it at you first so that you could respond.
Yeah, and engaging with the strategy teams from state government that are really leading workforce development efforts, I think that finding that cohesiveness for a network and explaining what kind of the broad commonalities and then the regional specificities for any of those micro pathways from a state perspective would be extremely helpful. I believe that the emergence of talent marketplaces and LERs and all of the metadata that supports what the skills and competencies that learners are obtaining through the micro pathway are really great communication points for workforce development professionals. And they can be a great partner, especially as we see the recurring competitive preference priority and federal funding opportunities that are coming through right now to describe what the network impact could be and to create those consortiums and coalitions. Strengthening community colleges around six is a great example for where the state can really be a great partner in those efforts.
Katie, thank you so much for sharing that. Dixie and Andrew, any other thoughts on on this question?
From an employer perspective, we mostly work with a college's career services department. We find that to be the lynch position between a student that is nearing completion or ready and job seeking and has the employer relationships and aware of what employers are out there and hiring. So we feel like that's a great place to be and a great starting point, someone that has connectivity to the students, job seeking, career ready students, as well as the employers who are hiring.
Excellent, thank you. And I hadn't really thought about career services before, so I'm so glad that you specified that because that wasn't on my radar. Andrew, how about for you?
Yeah, I think anywhere on a college campus, anywhere where you can start having the conversation is probably a good place to start having the conversation. Just start. Um, right now, it has turned in, microcredentials has turned into the phrase or has turned into almost a buzzword. And there are many at colleges who think that this is a financial center, right? Hey, we're going to add some more microcredentials. That'll bring it some more revenue. Those are inappropriate starting points, but nonetheless, if they even start there, they can at least begin conversations about what is this and why would we do it? Again, thinking through the experiences that I've had both Bristol and other previous institutions where we've launched micro credentials, the largest impact really has been in speaking with faculty members directly about how to build these programs. Students want them, employers want them. But working with faculty members to understand that these are, at least at this point, a shift to the left or to the right from what the work that is going on right now, but isn't going to cause any major upset in the current workflow. What do I mean by that? We're still grading assignments, we're still giving tests, we're still demonstrating that students can do things and acquiring skills. But what we haven't been doing is been documenting that. We've just been rolling it up into a grade at the course level, and that's sufficient. What's interesting about micro credentials is because the natural pull of skills is embedded within it, it's provided both a pushing point, but also a pulling point for institutions to talk with faculty members about what is going on inside the class. Again, I had mentioned that about algebra at 70%, but the student who drops the class before return to Title IV date, they've surely learned something. And in the world where CPL and CBE are building bridges to help support students, then having that additional information embedded within the micro credential is that very, very important. And so having those conversations with faculty members is going to produce outcomes that are going to have a substantial impact on students over time. So there is no real great, what is the very first place where an institution to start wherever and just keep talking about it and talk about it all the way up the chain, all the way down the chain, and all the way across the institution, because a micro-credential can't exist or live in one office, in one division, in one school. The registrar's office needs to be part of the planning and development, the exact same as faculty members do, in order to build an output, meaning the micro credential, that has meaning and value.
Andrew, beautifully said, and I think that it's really important to realize that it does sweep across the institution, and that it's critical that governance is established for um, this to work. It's different. Our micro-credential work is different than our traditional work, and needs that governance. And so I'm really glad that you brought that about. Katie did have to leave, but she did put her email address in the chat. If you have any questions for her, please feel free to email her. At this point, we're going to move on from the formal aspect of the webinar, and we're going to go to the Q&A. We're going to stop recording. And I see that Jeff put in the chat that they've implemented micro-credentials in the library at Nova. And